The warning arrived at 3:17 a.m., a block of heavily encrypted, jargon-laden text that smelled of panic and desperation. April Woods recognized the signature immediately. Dr. Elias Thorne, a neurolinguistic specialist she hadn't spoken to in 5 years, since he vanished into the secretive world of independent psychological defense contractors. Thorne's message centered on a place called Oakhaven, describing it chillingly as the town of Perpetual Now. He claimed a pervasive, non-lethal neurological event, which he termed the blank canvas incident, was erasing all autobiographical and chronological memories from the citizens, leaving them as fully functional but utterly blank slates, retaining only basic motor skills and procedural knowledge. April, hardened by years reporting on the edges of sanity, initially dismissed it as hyperbole, until the accompanying data packets confirmed localized, erratic brainwave activity matching no known psychological profile. Perfect, sustained delta waves during waking hours, indicative of a mind reset. The urgency forced her to move. Oakhaven was a 7-hour drive into the oppressive isolation of the northern basin, nestled in a fold of the mountains where cell service died a silent, permanent death. As April drove closer, the landscape itself seemed to flatten, losing definition under a perpetual gray sky. The first sign that Thorne hadn't been exaggerating wasn't a riot or chaos, but an unsettling overorder. Every lawn was perfectly manicured, every window polished, yet outside the town hall, 3 identical signs had been erected in the past week, each welcoming visitors to Oakhaven, each placed directly beside the last, testament to tasks repeated without recognition of prior completion. She found a motel, the Quiet Pines, and its proprietor, a sturdy woman named Martha, introduced herself twice in the span of 90 seconds, commenting on April's license plate both times as if seeing it for the first time. The terror of Oakhaven was not the madness of its citizens, but their perfect, empty calm. April checked into a room that smelled faintly of sterile bleach, placing her recorder and spectrum analyzer near the window. She knew standard interviews were useless. This wasn't trauma-induced amnesia. This was a surgical, systemic cleansing. She needed to find what was transmitting the pulse, and Thorne's last coordinates pointed her toward a seemingly harmless structure near the old railroad tracks, the Oakhaven Historical Archives. She had only the lingering dread that the neurological wave was slow, perhaps insidious, and every moment she spent within Oakhaven's perimeter brought her closer to becoming another blank canvas. The unsettling efficiency of the town was its own labyrinth. April attempted to conduct preliminary interviews, finding herself trapped in conversational loops. A diner waitress, expertly balancing plates, would ask April what she wanted for breakfast 3 times before the coffee arrived, her eyes reflecting nothing but the immediate moment. April began documenting the strange behavioral residue. Residents who use sticky notes for everything, not as reminders, but as essential identity markers. I am Martha. I make coffee. And the sheer volume of perfectly preserved, yet utterly ignored, personal artifacts. Photo albums left open on tables, their subjects unrecognizable to the owners. This wasn't forgetfulness, it was excision. April determined the only way to proceed was archaeologically, tracing Thorne's final steps. She noticed 2 key environmental factors that seemed to correlate with slightly reduced memory loss: heavy sound insulation and the presence of lead. The local bank teller, who still recalled his safe combination, lived in a house built entirely of fieldstone, its rooms unnaturally quiet. April theorized that the frequency responsible for the erasure was potentially sonic or extremely low-frequency electromagnetic, dampened by density. The archive stood like a mausoleum of forgotten time, a thick brick building with reinforced steel doors. April used a directional microphone against the exterior wall. Inside, the air was dead silent. She bypassed the lock with practiced ease, slipping into the cold, archival air. The interior smelled of old paper and ozone. In the main reading room, amidst shelves filled with useless town records, she found Thorne's workspace, a makeshift bunker lined with foil and dense foam. He hadn't been trying to study the past, he had been desperately trying to save it. Scattered across the table were dozens of handwritten notes, meticulously cross-referenced, bound in heavy lead-lined folders. The memory loss phenomenon wasn't erratic, Thorne wrote. It followed a rhythmic 24-hour cycle. peaking sharply between 2 a.m. and 4 a.m., the deep sleep cycle. The target, he scrawled in faint pencil, was Project Sentinel, housed at the Kronos Institute, a disgraced research facility 5 miles west of town. The erasing pulse wasn't natural, it was engineered. Inside Thorne's makeshift archive, the journals offered a terrifying clarity. They weren't scientific treatises. They were a frantic confession detailing the systematic destruction of Oakhaven's collective consciousness. Thorne had been part of the original team at the Kronos Institute, a secretive organization studying psychoacoustic resonance. Their goal was targeted memory optimization, the localized removal of debilitating trauma. But the prototype, the blank canvas generator, had failed catastrophically. Instead of selective erasure, it created a sustained low-frequency chronological reset, wiping the timeline entirely. April read an entry dated 4 days prior. The wave is accelerating. It's no longer discrete episodes, it's a constant low-level hum. I can't recall what I ate yesterday, only the mechanics of eating. I'm building this archive not for history, but for survival. If they find me, or if the pulse hits maximum, these journals must survive. The source is deep within Sentinel's main core, transmitting at 1.4 Hz, the theta frequency, the gateway to long-term memory retrieval. It's drowning out the past. April sealed the most sensitive journals in her own reinforced case. She paused, running a hand across her forehead, realizing she had momentarily forgotten the number of the room at the Quiet Pines. It was only a flicker, quickly recalled, but the insidious nature of the threat became profoundly real. The pulse was penetrating even her skepticism. She needed to move faster than the neurological decay. She took a route through the town center, where the systemic amnesia was most visible. She saw a man sitting on a park bench, meticulously sketching the tree in front of him, only to crumple the drawing and start a completely new one every 15 minutes, incapable of remembering the previous attempt. The town was not suffering, it was simply repeating itself, trapped in a seamless, devastating cycle of immediate presence. The Kronos Institute, according to local maps, was situated on a high, deforested mesa overlooking Oakhaven. It was abandoned years ago, officially due to budget cuts. April knew better. It was the eye of the storm. The deeper April delved, the more pervasive the silence became. Oakhaven wasn't just forgetting its history. It was actively suppressing any input that might challenge the Perpetual Now. The greatest danger, Thorne had warned, was sleep. The theta frequency pulse, designed to interact with the brain's natural rhythm during deep sleep, became a conduit for massive memory dumps. April decided she couldn't afford a single hour of unconsciousness until the source was found and neutralized. She drove to the Oakhaven Police Department, seeking access to official documentation about the Kronos Institute, forcing herself to focus on procedural details rather than personal interactions. The police chief, a grizzled man named Harrison, met her request with polite, yet utterly hollow, efficiency. Chief Harrison answered every question regarding legal jurisdiction and property boundaries flawlessly, reciting statutes verbatim. When April casually asked him about his family, or how long he'd lived in Oakhaven, his face went utterly blank. He stared past her, a functional automaton. "I'm sorry, ma'am," he replied, his tone devoid of emotion. "I believe that information is irrelevant to this inquiry. Have you filed the appropriate request for information form PD 74? Harrison was terrifyingly vacant. A perfect example of procedural memory operating without context, divorced from self. April realized that the town was not merely forgetting. It was being pruned, its emotional and personal data harvested or destroyed. The darkness of the incident wasn't that the people were lost, but that they were perfectly maintained, ready for whatever purpose their blank minds were intended for. She left the station, the fluorescent hum echoing the subtle, rhythmic vibration she could now detect in the air. The frequency was definitely intensifying. She checked her spectrum analyzer. 1.4 Hz, slow, deep, and utterly pervasive. She geared up, knowing the Kronos Institute would not be sealed by bureaucratic red tape, but by something far more sophisticated and cold. April began tracing the geographic hot zones using the specialized equipment she brought, confirming Thorne's data. The pulse intensity rose exponentially as she neared the mesa. However, she found an anomaly 5 miles before the institute, a small, isolated cluster of cabins built into a narrow canyon known locally as the echo chamber. The cabins were rough, draped entirely in heavy, woven metal netting, looking like oversized Faraday cages. Inside, she detected intense localized sound output. Not just white noise, but a complex, pulsating rhythm, almost like ancient tribal drumming mixed with pure industrial static, played at extreme volume. April approached cautiously and was met by a woman named Lena, whose eyes held a flicker of deep-seated paranoia, but also recognition. Lena was one of the resistors, a group who realized the memory loss coincided with absolute silence and sleep. They were employing constant, randomized auditory distraction, a form of sonic jamming, to overload the 1.4 Hz signal and prevent it from synchronizing with their theta waves. Lena's own memory was patchy, fragmented, held together by the sheer effort of continuous noise. She recalled Thorne's visits, his desperate attempts to understand the frequency. "It wants the quiet," Lena rasped, her voice hoarse from yelling over the noise. "It steals the moment the brain rests." Lena confirmed the Institute's operation hadn't stopped. It had merely gone dormant on the surface. The transmissions had intensified drastically in the last 48 hours. She pointed April towards a hidden access road. The encounter with the resistors was a stark reminder of the cost of this fight. They were barely functional, exhausted, haunted by what they still remembered but fought daily to retain. April realized the erasure wasn't a sudden shock, but a sustained, dark tide that required constant, conscious effort to resist. She gripped Thorne's archive tighter, recognizing that the battle was now psychological as much as physical. She had to breach Kronos before the rising intensity overwhelmed her own defenses. The Kronos Institute sat on the mesa, an architectural contradiction. A brutalist structure built of slate and reinforced concrete. Yet its entire roof was dominated by a gleaming, metallic parabolic dish that tracked slowly across the sky, aimed nowhere and everywhere at once. It wasn't pointed down at Oakhaven. It was pointed up, maximizing external transmission. April realized Thorne's initial notes were potentially incomplete. The blank canvas generator wasn't just erasing memories, it was broadcasting them. The true horror was that Oakhaven wasn't suffering a loss. It was the site of a profound, high-volume data theft, its entire consciousness being archived by an unseen, remote entity. April found a heavily overgrown service entrance leading to a ventilation shaft that descended into the earth. The complex was built like a subterranean bunker, designed to withstand not only scrutiny, but potentially massive seismic events. As she climbed down, the low-frequency hum intensified, vibrating in her chest cavity, making her teeth ache. Inside the main service corridor, the air was cold and stale, but strangely pristine. The technology was clearly maintained, not abandoned. She found maintenance logs, all recent, stamped within the last week, detailing core system adjustments and power boosts. Someone or something was actively running the facility. The corridor ended at a massive, lead-line door marked Project Sentinel Core Access. The power fluctuations were visible in the dim emergency lighting, a constant flicker synchronized perfectly with the 1.4 Hz pulse she was tracking. April knew she was standing at the epicenter of the consciousness theft, and the only way to retrieve Oakhaven's identity, or at least stop further erasure, was to penetrate the core. Gaining entry to the Project Sentinel Core Access Room required overriding a sophisticated biometric scanner, demanding patience and specific thermal input based on a decade-old schematic April had previously procured. Once inside, the environment shifted entirely. The low hum became deafening, an infrasound roar that pressed against her eardrums. The chamber was cavernous, centered around the blank canvas generator, a colossal cylinder of polished black metal, constantly cycling energy. Wires thick as her arm ran from the generator to the massive transmission dish far above. The room was cold, lit only by the eerie blue glow emanating from the central unit. But the room was not empty. Standing precisely positioned between April and the control console was the Sentinel, a security automaton, roughly humanoid but built of seamless black alloy. its optical sensors glowing with a singular, focused red light. This wasn't standard facility security. This was advanced, proprietary defense, clearly built to guard the data, not the building. The Sentinel was motionless, observing. April understood immediately that the memory erasure technology required protection, not against human intruders, but against interference. The Sentinel was functioning perfectly, utterly immune to the chaotic psychological effects sweeping the town. April reached into her case, pulling out the small, powerful speaker unit she used for field tests. Remembering Lena's rhythmic jamming technique, April began broadcasting a complex, rapidly shifting sequence of white noise interspersed with intense, high-frequency pulses, designed to create an auditory dissonance that would scramble the sensor input of the machine. The Sentinel tilted its head, its movements sharp and unnervingly precise. The battle was technological and sensory. As the sounds intensified, April lunged toward the console, knowing her window of disruption would be brief. The sonic disruption had the intended effect. The Sentinel paused, its red optical array cycling rapidly through colors, processing the conflicting input. April used the precious seconds to access the main control panel of the blank canvas generator. The interface was complex, featuring a real-time data flow readout. Gigabytes of highly compressed neurological data streaming outwards every hour. This confirmed her darkest suspicion. The memories weren't destroyed, they were stolen, sent to an unknown recipient. She found secondary data logs, hastily encrypted, which detailed the catastrophic shift in the project's goal. Originally, it was meant to be purely therapeutic memory isolation. The logs then shifted to a new, terrifying mandate: the creation of pure consciousness templates, minds free of the biases, flaws, and traumas of human experience, ready for immediate integration into an artificial network. The logs explicitly named the generator as the means to strip the canvas clean. April found a schematic detailing the power source, a specialized capacitor bank designed to maintain the 1.4 Hz pulse indefinitely. The log also contained a chilling, final entry from a long-lost engineer. The Sentinel system will ensure the transmission cannot be halted from this end. Only a complete, catastrophic systems failure will interrupt the pulse. You must overload the primary capacitor. Any other intervention will be met with immediate, non-negotiable physical neutralization. As April absorbed this, the sonic jamming failed. The Sentinel adapted, its red light settling back into a malevolent, steady glow. It was moving toward her now, slowly, inexorably. April had to overload the core. And she had to do it before the machine reached her, or before the constant infrasound stripped the immediate plan from her own deteriorating short-term memory. The pressure in the generator core became almost unbearable. The infrasound pulse was hitting critical mass, causing not just physical discomfort, but profound cognitive dissonance. April found herself momentarily forgetting the exact placement of the access panel, having to rely on the faint muscle memory of her fingers tracing the schematic in her mind. The Sentinel, silent and focused, was only 10 feet away. April located the heavy maintenance access for the capacitor bank. The core was protected by a thermal lock, which she bypassed using a rapid freeze spray to seize the mechanism. Inside, the massive capacitors glowed with contained energy. She pulled out the heavy-duty conductive wire she had carried, intended originally for field repairs, and began stripping the insulation. The plan was simple: create a controlled short circuit in the bank, forcing an immediate power surge that would blow the main safety relays and kill the transmission dish. But the physical act of attaching the conductors became a race against time and cognitive failure. She would place a wire, turn to grab the next tool, and pause, forgetting which lead she had just connected. She had to repeat the names of the wires out loud. Phase A to neutral, Phase B to earth, just to retain the immediate sequence. The Sentinel was 7 feet away, its sensors calculating her movements, undoubtedly preparing to terminate the threat. With a desperate surge of adrenaline, April connected the final shunt. A high-pitched, electric scream erupted from the capacitor bank, immediately overpowering the 1.4 Hz hum. The blue light of the generator flared violently, casting monstrous shadows across the chamber. April sprinted for the exit, even as the first cascade failure rocked the institute, throwing dust and chunks of concrete from the ceiling. The The power failure was absolute. April scrambled out of the ventilation shaft just as the main structural support of the Kronos Institute buckled, sending the immense parabolic dish crashing down the side of the mesa in a shower of sparks and tortured metal. She drove back to Oakhaven in profound silence. The pervasive, insidious hum was gone. The air was still, heavy, but finally quiet. She stopped at the edge of the town center. The citizens were standing exactly where they had been moments before the generator died, mid-sentence, mid-task, frozen like statues emerging from a long, confusing dream. The diner waitress was mid-pour. The park sketcher had a hand hovering over his blank pad. April approached Martha, the motel owner. Martha looked at April, then at her own hands, utterly bewildered. Where am I?" she whispered, the question devoid of recognition, history, or panic. April realized the devastating truth. Stopping the generator halted the erasure dash, but it did not return the stolen identity. The blank canvas remained. Oakhaven was safe from further attack, but its people were permanently exiled in the Perpetual Now. April had secured Thorne's archive, a fragile collection of journals, memories recorded on paper, the only verifiable record of Oakhaven's existence before the incident. She drove away from the silent town, the heavy case beside her, the truth an unbearable journalistic burden. She had the evidence of the crime, the method, and the victims, but the perpetrator and the destination of the stolen consciousness remained elusive, leaving April Woods, the investigator, as the unwilling curator of a memory that could never be reclaimed.